National Security Council spokesman, a longtime CIA analyst who just resigned from the CIA with a very public blast at the Trump administration. Ned, thanks very much for joining us.
It's good to be here, Wolf.
All right, so you quit your post at the CIA last week where you worked for, 11 years, 3 most recently. You were detailed to the National Security Council where you were the spokesman there. So why quit now and why quit so publicly?
Well, Wolf, let me describe to you what I saw over the course of many months. I saw a Republican nominee during a primetime debate just casually doubt the high confidence assessment of all of our 17 intelligence agencies. I saw a president-elect compare our intelligence community to Nazis. I heard him accuse the intelligence community of leaking. And then I saw a President Trump, on his first full day in office, travel to Langley, Virginia, presumably to attempt to repair relations with the CIA. Standing before the most solemn memorial in Langley, Virginia, a memorial to the 117 men and women who have given their lives in service to the CIA, he bragged about the size of the crowd at his inauguration the day before. That was all public. What was not public, but what was clear to many of us, was the ideology and really the orthodoxy that this administration has maintained. I did not feel that this administration would be open to the kind of candid assessments, the kind of frank reports and analysis that, as a CIA analyst, I would be charged with producing.
I read your article, your op-ed in the Washington Post outlining the major reasons why you decided to resign, quit from the CIA at this point. And after reading your article, I asked Phil Mudd, he's a former CIA counterterrorism official, a CNN analyst right now, about your decision to resign so early in this new administration. I want you to listen, Ned, to what he said.
Let's see where the rubber meets the road here. We have a Secretary of Defense, a Secretary of State, and a Vice President who have said things on Russia, for example, that reflect the intelligence and differ from what the President has said. You can quit if you want, but 28 or 30 days into a presidency, you can't say it's because you think intelligence is politicized. I don't buy it.
All right, I want you to respond to that, why you decided not to wait, and why not, for example, give Mike Pompeo, the new CIA director, a chance.
Wolf, it's a fair question, and it's a uniquely personal decision, one that I made and one that perhaps others at the CIA are considering at the moment. I think, Wolf, I had 2 options at my disposal. I could have gone back to the CIA, made a nice salary, enjoyed a 5-figure salary at the expense of the American taxpayers, and produced reports and analysis that I feel, by all indications, would have been given essentially no due deference. This administration has hewed to its so-called America First ideology, and it has shown no sign of changing its policy based on the kind of analysis the CIA would produce. When I signed up to be a CIA analyst in 2006, when I first entered Langley for the first time, I did so because I wanted to serve the American people. And I concluded, albeit reluctantly, that I could do that more effectively from the outside.
Your critics are already pointing out, you probably know this already, that you did make political contributions back in August to the Hillary for America campaign, $2,700, to the DNC, $2,300. You say your decision wasn't about politics, but do the political contributions say otherwise?
No, Wolf. As an intelligence professional, I have never spoken out about my personal views. That is not my right. It is not my role. What I can do as an intelligence professional whose work was governed by the Hatch Act was to donate to candidates who I thought shared my values, and I thought that Secretary Clinton did. Wolf, just to be clear, I joined the CIA in 2006. I worked proudly for President George W. Bush. One of the most memorable days of my CIA career was waiting for what seemed like hours to meet President Bush on one of his visits to the Central Intelligence Agency. I stood in line just to shake his hand, and I was proud to do so because he was a commander-in-chief, granted not all of whose policies, especially on the domestic side, I agreed with, but he was a commander-in-chief and I respected him, and I respected the way he kept our country safe.
But you're saying you could not respect the current commander-in-chief, President Trump, in that way, even though that he's got a Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Homeland Security, a CIA director, now a National Security Advisor, whom you presumably do respect?
I certainly do respect many of those men, and President Trump is the commander-in-chief, and I certainly respect that. But Wolf, when you look at this administration's early moves, the CIA director was initially not a principal on the National Security Council. The director of national intelligence was initially not a principal on the National Security Council. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff initially was not a principal on the National Security Council. Steve Bannon was a principal and is a principal on the National Security Council. Look, I certainly hope that this administration will allow many of the voices you just mentioned to be active in the debate, to have a say, but critically to listen to them. They can sit around a table all they want and spout off their opinions, but if those aren't taken into account in this small circle of policymaking that is driven by the White House, it'll be all for naught.
Because you say that the final straw in your decision was Steve Bannon having a seat on the National Security Council during the transition, and you were still the spokesman at the National Security Council during the transition. You worked closely with the National Security Advisor, Susan Rice. Did you have any direct interactions with Bannon?
I don't want to speak to any interactions I had as when I was at the NSC. That was a process that we tried to run as best we could, and I don't want to speak to the details of that. But it was something that we undertook with the utmost professionalism, and from our end, we tried to prepare this administration as best we could to take the mantle.
Well, why do you think it's a problem for Bannon to sit on the National Security Council if the President of the United States wants him to be there?
Well, Wolf, it's really unprecedented. I can certainly speak to the case during the Obama administration, and those individuals whom I would consider political very rarely sat in on the National Security Council. And when they did so, they weren't sitting at the table, they didn't have a vote, they were sitting as backbenchers, especially when the equities concerned, especially when there was a domestic equity involved. For example, during the Ebola response, it was very critical that individuals from different parts of the White House, including the communications shop, were aware of how we were communicating with the American people about our Ebola response, both at home and abroad. So I certainly found it appropriate that they were backbenchers during these meetings, as occasionally, and quite rarely, frankly, they were. What never happened during the Obama administration, and which I certainly don't think has happened during any other administration, is to have a overtly political voice sitting at the table and critically with a vote, one of a few votes.
All right, Ned, back with Ned Price. He's a former National Security Council spokesman during the last 3 years of the Obama administration, a CIA analyst for about 11 years. He just resigned from the CIA, saying he quit because of President Trump. Ned, you say the politicians are tuning out the intelligence community in this new Trump administration. If that's true, clearly that could be dangerous. But what evidence do you have they're tuning out the intelligence community?
Well, Wolf, it could absolutely be dangerous, and the consequences of that, I think, at this point are untold. I think the clearest indication, Wolf, was the first national security policy directive that this administration put out. This was the same directive that, at the time, removed the CIA director, removed the director of national intelligence.
But they were all brought back in subsequently to that.
The CIA director was, but only after pretty harsh criticism, and that may have well been just a salve to calm some of their critics. But to my mind, their inclination was clear. The Situation Room in this administration may not have room for dissenting voices who are going to call them like they see them, and that is exactly the role of the CIA director and the director of national intelligence.
But don't you believe that Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, the new national security advisor, who is widely being praised right now, wants the best intelligence, not only from the CIA, but 15 or 16 other U.S. intelligence agencies? Don't you have confidence that he wants great intelligence?
I certainly believe that. I have no reason to doubt that. I've never met General McMaster, but I've only heard the best things about him from many colleagues I respect. Look, you can have all of the inputs you want, and voices can be incorporated in parts of the policy process, but it's the output that really matters. And I think what we've seen during the course of the 4 weeks or so that the Trump administration has been in office, that the inputs are given short shrift, and the outputs are manufactured almost exclusively by a small group of advisors who are around the president, very few of whom, in my opinion, have foreign policy and national security credentials.
Well, General Mattis does, the Secretary of Defense, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I hope that people like General Mattis will be actively involved in the policymaking process, and that their voices will be listened to.
What about Mike Pompeo, the new CIA director? He's pretty widely respected.
So, you know, Director Pompeo is someone who has experience with intelligence from his time on the House Permanent Select Committee. I've heard good things from those who have worked closely with him. You know, in some ways it was a pick that ran counter to the nonpartisan nature of previous CIA directors. But if Congressman Pompeo, if Director Pompeo now can cast aside his partisanness, I think he has the capacity to be an excellent CIA director.
So finally, what do you say to your former CIA colleagues, your friends who are still serving in the agency? Should they stay or should they go?
This was not meant to be a recommendation to any of my now former colleagues. This was the personal decision that I came to, and came to very reluctantly. I certainly understand those who are staying in place, and frankly, I certainly hope there are good people who remain, who will not only offer their best advice and expertise to this administration, but will, when appropriate, be a check on power in an appropriate way. So I am certainly not encouraging them to take one course or another. This was a decision that I thought was best for me. This was the way that I thought that I could most effectively serve the American people, which is what I initially signed up to do.
Ned Price joining us. Ned, thanks very much, former CIA analyst, former spokesman for the National Security Council. Thanks for joining us.